Oh,
Can you hear me now?
yes, Governor.
But there's no picture?
Wait a minute. Let me. You should be able to turn on your video where it says stop video.
Uh,
Give me a moment.
I don't have that. I have,
Let me promote you to panelist.
okay, put me to panel. Okay. Join as a panelist.
Yes.
Okay, it's done.
All right.
That's me. So
There you are, Governor.
Thank you. You're a technology expert.
Try to be. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you all for coming on the phone call this evening. Right before I begin with some of your biography introductions, I'd just like to first add to the panel real quick. Katie Keister, who is the president of the Intelligence Club, just wants to make a brief statement thanking us for co-advertising the event and try to get more people in on the call. Hi, Katie.
Hi. Just wanted to, thank you guys for letting us join in on this event. We're super excited about it because the 9/11 Commission was started to give a complete and all-around account of the 9/11 terrorist attacks and to provide guidance as to how to stop this from happening again. We recognize how crucial the role of intelligence is, and this is just a really great opportunity to learn about how intelligence can play a role in life and death decisions. So we appreciate you guys putting on this event and are really excited about it.
All right. Thank you very much, Katie. I'm going to return you as a guest. Where is? Oh, accidentally clicked on the wrong one. That's what happens. Got to have the governor come back on. Oh, Governor?
Okay, I'm back.
beg
Yeah,
your
I think I
beg
just
your
have to sign in again.
I beg your pardon. All right.
No.
Katie Keister will be going back as a attendee. So I'd like to first, before we begin with the questions, give brief introductory remarks for Governor Kean and Dr. Felzenberg, our esteemed panelists. So I'd like to first introduce Governor Kean. On December 16th, 2002, Tom Kean was named by President George W. Bush to head the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States. The commission's work culminated in the 9/11 Commission report, which is why we're here to talk about this evening. Governor Kean served as chairman of the 9/11 Public Discourse Project, a nonprofit entity created with private funds to continue the commission's work of guarding against future attacks, and may have been the last truly bipartisan effort on a major issue. Governor Kean, during his tenure in the New Jersey State House in the 1980s, was rated among America's most effective state leaders by Newsweek magazine, noted for tax cuts that spurred close to 1 million new jobs, a federally replicated welfare program, landmark environmental policies, and more than 30 education reforms. He also delivered the keynote address of the 1988 Republican National Convention, and he was reelected for a second term by the largest margin in state history, carrying 70% of the vote and 60% of the African-American community. While as governor, he served in the president's Education Policy Advisory Committee and chaired the Education Commission, and was very present in the National Governors Association. Governor Kean served as president of Drew University from 1990 until 2005. During Kean's presidency, applications to Drew increased by more than 40%. The endowment nearly tripled. And then Governor Kean served on several national committees and commissions. He had the American delegation to the UN Conference on Youth in Thailand. He also helped out on President Clinton's initiative on race relations. Governor Kean currently serves as chairman of the board of Carnegie Corporation of New York. In addition, he has served a number of corporate boards and is co-chair of Jersey Ken and is co-chairman with Congressman Lee Hamilton at the National Security Preparedness Group. He is vice chairman of the Environmental Defense Fund. He holds a bachelor's from Princeton University and a master's from Columbia University in Teachers College and has served as a trustee of both institutions. Governor Kean is author of The Politics of Inclusion, published by Free Press, and is co-author of Without President, published by Alfred A. Knopf, a division of Random House Incorporated. He wrote an award-winning column for the Star Ledger with former Governor Brendan Byrne and appears as a regular commentator on NJTV News. He has twin sons, Tom and Reed, and a daughter, Alexandra, and resides in Bedminster, New Jersey. Dr. Alvin Felzenberg is a recognized expert on American politics, the American presidency, Congress, and political movements. A veteran of 2 presidential administrations, Dr. Felzenberg served as principal spokesman for the 9/11 Commission. He also served as an advisor to the Departments of State and Defense, and for a decade served in senior staff positions for the House of Representatives. In 2006, Dr. Felzenberg was a fellow at the Institute of Politics at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. Since 2007, Dr. Felsenberg's been teaching communications and political science at the Annenberg School for Communication at the University of Pennsylvania. He's also lectured at Princeton, Yale, Johns Hopkins, and George Washington Universities, and holds a PhD in politics from Princeton University. Dr. Felsenberg is the author of the recently published A Man as Presidents, The Political Odyssey, William F. Buckley Jr., and a few other books include Governor Tom Kean from the New Jersey State House to the 9/11 Commission from Rutgers University Press, 2006. He's a former columnist for U.S. News and World Report. Dr. Felsenberg has appeared as a commentator on major public affairs television shows, including CNN's Crossfire, MSNBC's Morning Joe, and Hardball with Chris Matthews, National Public Radio's Talk of the Nation, and multiple others. His writings have appeared in the Washington Post, the Weekly Standard, the Philadelphia Inquirer, Christian Science Monitor, Politico, and National Review. Now, I'd like to begin with some questions about both of your gentlemen's times involved regarding the 9/11 Commission itself. As a first question, I'd like to ask both of you, what were your feelings and memories that you gained an experience on the day of the 9/11 attacks?
Well, Al, I guess I'll start off. That's the kind of thing you never forget. For somebody my generation, it's like asking you where you were when President Kennedy got shot. You always remember. In this case, I was home because I'd had dental surgery. And my dentist called me on the phone early in the morning and said, "How are you feeling?" Just to check up on me, which was nice of him. And they said, "By the way, turn on the television. Something's happened at the World Trade Center." So the first plane that hit, I turned on the television. Of course, the second plane hit. And at that point, we all knew it was not just an accident. And so I was worried about my university. I was president of Drew University at that point, as the university is located not far out of the city. So I said, we're gonna have students at the university who have parents, maybe family members who've been involved, and they're gonna need help. And so I drove as fast as I could to the university. I couldn't, people remember that day, none of the phones worked. It knocked out every, I guess it was excess calling or something, we knocked out every phone. So you couldn't get through to anybody. So I had to send messages around to the residence halls to tell the students I wanted to get them together in the largest hall we had on campus. And they all came together and I talked about what I thought had happened. And said there were grief counselors available and there were ministers available and people, and if any of you needed them, that's where to go. and that I would keep in touch with them and see what we could do. All the students want to do is know how they can help. I mean, they said, can we get to the site? Is there any way we can help this? People thought they're going to be survivors at that point. So they all wanted to go. How's their own interest was helping, but luckily none of them or their families had actually been involved. But I never forget the morning.
Dr. Felzenberg?
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and
Okay.
clear.
Okay. I happen to be in New Jersey taking care of a number of things, going back to Washington. I had a doctor's appointment. And I stayed over with a friend of Governor Kean and mine, Carl Esquire in Maplewood. And I was supposed to take, I think it was the 8:40 train from Newark, Penn Station down to Union Station. And we heard something at some point in the station. We didn't know what it was, that a plane had hit the World Trade Center. And the first report was they thought the pilot lost control of the plane, but it hit the World Trade Center. That's all we knew. We went up to the train came in, got on the train. For some reason I took the left seat and I turned around and I saw the second tower get hit. I remember there's this view, a very short view of the New York skyline, just as the train leaves Newark. I saw that ball but no one told us anything on the train. We got to Philadelphia and they told us that that all the trains were stopped and I had to get off the train. And when we got into 30th Street Station, they told us what had happened. Then the local pranksters got a hold of it and they started telephoning in bomb scares to 30th Street Station. So I don't know how many thousands of people were in the train station at that point. We all went out into the street, which is the worst place to be with a crowd. And it was clear they weren't starting the train again. Now, the Republican convention had taken place the previous summer. And I knew a boarding house that had a few rooms. It was not one of the big Marriotts or whatever it was. It was not far from Union Station, from 30th Street Station. So it was clear to me I wasn't going to get out that day. So I just walked. I got the last row in this small hotel called the Betsy Ross Inn. And it was not far from the station. And then they said that the city was shutting down. So I asked if there was a 7-Eleven anywhere and I got a toothbrush. Couldn't call anybody. I couldn't call Carla to say I wasn't going home and I wasn't going to Washington. I couldn't get through. All the phones are out, the landlines and the cell phones. And I remember, I guess I stayed there for about a day and a half. I left, I guess, late the next morning, or maybe I stayed 2 days, but I left a morning or two later and decided to keep going to Washington. And then I was finishing something with the Heritage Foundation then. And I just done a project for them during the Bush Gore transition. And Bush wasn't in all that long. We had a few things to finish out. I say that because it was 2 days after the attack and you could still smell the soot and the residue and the gravel everywhere in Washington. Washington wasn't hit, but it was the residue from the Pentagon. And saw some friends for the first time since the attack. I fortunately didn't have any relatives or personal friends I knew, but I know many people who lost nieces, nephews, college roommates, spouses, and other things that day. And yeah, that's my memory of it.
Thank you. Next question is for Governor Kean. What was it like to be asked by the Bush administration to serve as chairman of the 9/11 Commission?
Well, first of all, it was totally unexpected. Henry Kissinger had been asked to be chairman, and Senator Mitchell, the Democrats, had asked to be vice chairman. They both had big business obligations, and the Congress asked them to list their clients so they could make sure there were no conflicts of interest. And the families are very particularly in that kind of thing. And so both of them decided independently, first Kissinger, then Mitchell, that if they disclosed their clients, they're going to lose those clients. And in the process, probably lose the business. So they both stepped aside. And so Lee Hamilton, who was my vice chairman, and I were the second place people, the second choice for chairman and vice chairman. But I never expected to get the call. And when I did get the call, I felt like a ton of bricks had been dropped on me. It just was there was so much confusion around that. It was, as you know, one of the greatest events ever happened to the people of this country. And it took me a while to figure out one how to proceed from here, and secondly to realize that, because you can't say no. I'd said no to the president on a number of occasions. A number of presidents had been offered cabinet positions that are presidents of both parties, and I didn't want to go to Washington, so I said no. But when you have something like this, you can't say no. I can't say no when my president asked me to do it. So I said yes, and then sat back and figured, what the hell am I into?
Great. Thank you. Dr. Felzenberg, what was it like to be asked by Governor Kean to serve alongside him again?
It was a great honor. First of all, I was at that point consulting with the State Department, and we're always restructuring how we talk to the world, and maybe someday we'll figure it out. But they wanted our Voice of America to have a better voice and better editorials. And how would we go about doing it? I was finished a meeting at that point, and the governor called, and he asked what I knew about the 9/11 Commission. We didn't even have a name yet. What I knew about this group that was going to investigate the attacks of 9/11. I said not very much, and I said I had known about Kissinger, and I knew he wasn't going to serve. And then the governor said, "Do you have any idea who is going to take his place?" And I said, "No, I haven't read anything yet." And he said, "Well, I don't know if they announced it, but I'm going to be doing that. And would you be interested in working with us?" And I said, "Of course I would." Again, we're friends a long time. I was honored to get the call. We had a very good working relationship in Trenton, and even before that, I never expected the governor to be involved, and I was just very honored to do it. We didn't know what role I would play yet, and I had some clearances. I wasn't the State Department. I'd worked at the Pentagon, so maybe that would have sped up a little. I hoped, but I didn't know where. Went into the office. But then some interesting things after that. The governor said, "Well, I wanted to ascertain if you were interested, but I have to tell you two things. I want you to talk to two people before we take this any further. I want you to talk to the man we're going to have as executive director." I didn't even know his name yet. That was Phil Zelikow. And he said, "And by all means, you have to talk to Lee Hamilton." And he said, "I called to ascertain your interest, and I'm honored you're interested, but I promised and I made a rule that I would not hire anybody that Lee did not sign off on. And obviously you're going to be working day to day with Phil. But somebody will be back to you. Maybe I'll be back to you. And we don't have an office. We don't even have anything yet. So I think he said, "I don't have my own clearance yet," something like that. And that was fine. And that was, I guess, sometime in December. And then I remember, I think I started in February. At that point, we had some office space. I think GSA found us. I was quite honored, and I still go back and say it was the honor of my life to work with Tom Kean, and both in New Jersey. All the things you said, I had a ringside seat to some great history with that. And then to be called back 20 years later, it's very unusual, but it was an honor of my life to do it.
Thank you. Governor Kean, could you please elaborate on what the first day of the commission was like?
Well, first of all, Washington was a very confused place at that point. And we didn't have a place, Sal said, we didn't have, I bet you don't know what a skiff is, because I didn't. I thought it was a small boat, honestly. A skiff is an office that is so set up with protections all around the walls so it's impossible to penetrate. So if you have a listening device, you can't listen to what's going on in the skiff. And when you enter the skiff, you have to leave your cell phone at the door because somebody can listen through a cell phone. So you have to leave that at the door and you go into the skiff. So we got our first skiff. We ended up, I think, with 3 skiffs before we were finished. So we were meeting in this space for the first time, and we didn't know each other. I had met Lee Hamilton once or twice over a period of 10 years. We were both in government, I guess, but that's all. And I knew one other commissioner who had been a governor with me, the governor of Illinois, Jim Thompson. I didn't know any of the rest of them, and they didn't know me. So, and this was a period of a lot of partisanship because President Bush was going to run for re-election. President Bush, remember, had been elected in part by a court decision about hanging chads and all that kind of thing. And so the Democrats were thirsting to win an election they thought they may have won last time. And so it was a very partisan time. And so we were sitting looking at each other, and I walked into the room. And the Democrats, of course, were sitting in a corner, talking to each other. Republicans sitting in another corner, talking to each other, because most of them knew each other. And the first thing I said was, we're going to start the meeting. Please join me at the table. And I don't want to see any Democrat sitting next to another Democrat. I don't want to see any Republican sitting next to one Republican. So I think they didn't know this strange guy from New Jersey. And I think they thought this was a little bit imposing way to start the meeting, but they did it. And we never again appeared in public any other way for the whole rest of the commission. And so the first meeting at 2 was getting to know each other, getting to know the people, the major staff, the people we'd appointed to staff, the council and the executive director of the staff, the number 2 in the staff, getting to know a guy named Al Felzenberg, who was going to do, I think, public relations. I think I don't know, have you been appointed at that point, Al? I think you had.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
first meeting. And so it was just really getting down to business, but mainly I recognized getting to know each other. And one of the, and so I was not the kind of person I usually have in Washington, because I'd said, to Lee Hamilton, for instance, I'm not going to make any decision on this commission from now on without your approval. What Lee told me afterwards was, he said, I've been a congressman for most of my life. He said, in Washington, the chairman is everything. The vice chairman is nothing. So when you walked in and said you would consult me on everything and want my approval of any major decisions made, you said, I couldn't believe it. I sat back and said, doesn't seem real. So we moved in that way with a different from the usual Washington approach. But the whole beginning of the commission was really, in my mind, getting to know each other, getting to trust each other. And if people don't know each other, my experience is that takes at least a month, maybe more. And I think it took at least that long in the commission before we really started to. The first couple of meetings, there was still a little wariness, Republicans here and Democrats there. And you're going to be unfair to the president of the White House. You're going to make Bill Clinton look bad and what he did before this thing. And people were guarding their own little patches. And it took a while before people started talking to each other as equals in commissions.
Okay. Thank you, Governor. In the book by Dr. Felzenberg, there are many instances where the press was very aggressive, such as in a CBS interview. Could both of you please share your thoughts on what occurred at that time? And what was it like dealing with the press and other public relations hurdles during the commission's existence?
Well, I thanked my lucky stars that I had Al Felzenberg between me and the press for a while. Because to have somebody you trust, and Al and I had known each other for a long time at that point. So, somebody's known you for a long time, now I think. And so they can deal with the press in a way that somebody who comes in brand new and doesn't really know you can't do. So I was very, very grateful. I want Al to talk about the press, not me, but the way I started was before I'd even come down to Washington, I got a call from the guy who then ran Meet the Press, which was, then I don't think it still is, I guess maybe the leading Sunday show in Washington. They want the new face in town. I was the new face in town. So he calls, I want you to appear on the show. And I said, fine, I'd be glad to. I got one request. He said, what? Could I bring Lee Hamilton, my Democratic vice chairman, with me? And he said, pause a second. I said, in Washington, normally guests don't invite guests. I do that. And I said, okay, then maybe we can do it sometime in the future. And he called me back within 5 minutes. and said, we'd be delighted to have you and Congressman Hamilton on the show. So that's my memory of how I started with the Washington Press Corps, and then went on from there. But Al, you were the one who dealt with them every day, and you remember those interviews and those shows. This was the biggest story in Washington for about 3 or 4 months. And so they were always on top of us to find out what they could find out. And they were always looking for dissent, they were always looking for divisions, they were always trying to separate us from the families and separate us from Congress. And so they were very aggressive.
There was, wow, a great interest in the 9/11 Commission, part of the press, and part of Washington, as the governor said. I believe our first hearing was in New York. I think it was in the Alexander Hamilton Trade Building, at Foley Square near the courthouse.
It was there, by the way, Al, because I was the only commissioner from right in around the New York area. And most of the commissioners had never seen the site. And I thought as we started our work, it was very important because the impact of that hole where those 2 towers had stood was incredible emotionally and in every other way. And I wanted the commissioners to go there, see the site, meet some of the families, and really understand what was going on before we started. So Al's right. That was our first meeting, and that's why I was there.
The governor did a few things at the beginning that surprised a lot of people, including the staff. And I will admit, there was a little pushback because the governor said he wanted to have public hearings. He didn't want us to retreat behind a curtain like the Wizard of Oz and then come out and here's the report. And then the president would thank us for the report. And as past commissions had done, it would sit on a shelf and that would be that. And he said, we have to keep the public with us. So we're never going to get the pressure to get whatever we recommend adopted at the end. And obviously the staff was somewhat concerned because the hearing is usually 3 hours of preparation for every hour of the hearing. And you have to do all these things simultaneously. So, but it was an opportunity, as the governor said, I'm quoting him now, I want the American people to watch us learn. We don't know anything about Al-Qaeda. We don't know anything about some other terrorist groups that had threatened attacks that didn't do attacks. We don't know what the political scientists said. We don't know anything about their brand of Islam that they're practicing. And we want to hear from survivors. So some people who were lucky to survive and they wanted to tell their story. We wanted to hear from the families. We wanted the mayor to have an opportunity to speak, Mayor Bloomberg. And at some point, I think Giuliani came at some other point, but Bloomberg was the mayor now dealing with the cleanup and dealing with all the lawsuits that came out of that event. So those are some quick decisions the governor made. We are going to have hearings. We're going to come back every couple of months. People will see where we're learning. Now on the press, I said I started in February. January was an interesting month because I lived in the New Jersey area too. I remember the World Trade Center very, very well. I remember when it went up. There were jokes about Nelson Rockefeller's edifice complex. You had the Albany Wall upstate, you had the World Trade Center downstate. And then to make the World Trade Center work, they had to move some state buildings into the unit before they got the big corporations to be willing to rent. And then they moved a lot of state office buildings in, and then he needed more tenants, so he called Chase Manhattan Bank, and David Rockefeller moved the bank. So we had a tower for Delson, a tower for David. I knew that all of this, the history of the World Trade Center itself, what it meant for that area. But I didn't know, I thought that would be, we divided the staff into, I think we had 8 teams. Each were dealing with a different topic, and then we would come together as we worked. And I had asked who was doing the press, and I was told that somebody was coming down from Boston and I should start doing research on the World Trade Center and things I just said. And then Phil called and said, you have an interest in doing the press because he's not coming, and you know the governor, and you know me, and now you know Lee Hamilton. And by the way, there's a hearing in a week. Tell me where it was. And I didn't even have a press list. How do you do this? And you do it by just jumping in and doing it. I learned a couple of lessons. Do we have about 30 people on the call? Some of you might go into internships. Some of you might be press secretaries. Some of you might be interested in writing in government. I always tell people that's an easy way to get into Capitol Hill because they put out so much paper every day. Governor and Lee Hamilton and Phil, I give them great credit for this, not because of me, but because of them. They said that we have a lot of private meetings that aren't public. We have a lot of meetings with just commissioners and sometimes staff as needed. We need Al in the room at all times. I mean, he has a clearance and he needs to know how we relate with each other, the things we like to do and don't like to do, but more importantly, he needs to know the kind of topics that are going to come up. So when he's talking to them or they call for information, he knows what is classified and what not to say, and he knows some of the things we should say that are well, everything we say will be accurate, but there are some things we can't talk about now. We'll come back to. So that was one decision they made, that if you don't have the communications person in the room, he doesn't have a feel for you, he's not going to be able to do a very good job when he's out there by himself. The other decision they made was that the governor just described that. First time we were all in the Capitol, same conversation happened, but this one was NPR and National Public Radio Television. NPR was Judy Woodruff. She wanted Governor Kean to come on. And I think this would have been the first or the second interview. Maybe it was the second one since Meet the Press was put on hold, but they only met on Sunday then. She has the news every night. And I said to her that the governor would be delighted to come on if Congressman Hamilton come on together with him. It was the same response. Yes, we'd love to do it. This set a pattern that every time the governor went on, it was, and the congressman went on, it was the chairs. The chairs would go on. And they got the name, the chairs. They didn't have first names. That's the chairs, 9/11 Commission. If some of them couldn't make it, we'd call another commissioner, and then they would come on the same thing. They went out as pairs, Republican and Democrat. I learned something. I'll end with this. We can come back to it as we go. You asked me about the CBS story. We were a little bit sandbagged here. We were told that this is going to be, and I learned a valuable lesson. This was going to be a human interest story. It's not often we have a college professor in a leafy town in a tweedy jacket being pulled away from his students and his other tasks to go down and deal with the most important thing in America. So could our reporter spend a couple of days with him? Can he watch him in class? Can he follow him around to a basketball game or this or that? He's having office hours with students. Can we photograph him in the classroom? Can we? And I don't know how many hours he spent on campus doing this. And finally, it took about a month to get this on the air. Where is this thing coming? And suddenly, it was. I'm not saying the press was out to get anyone, but it was the worst possible presentation. As the governor was talking about, of course, people have to be held accountable. That's what the commission is supposed to do. We're going to find out how this happened and why it happened and under whose watch it happened. As he's making those comments, we didn't know anything yet. We still started the investigation. Up come pictures of Condi Rice. Up come pictures of Donald Rumsfeld. Up come pictures of the president. And if you were just passing through, getting a glass of water while the set was on, you would think he was talking about them. Well, lo and behold, we were trying to establish a record of trust for the administration. And here we didn't know anything yet. And suddenly this kind of splicing was done. It wasn't what the governor was saying, it was the visuals. And I don't know how long they had this in the studio. Splicing must have taken months to do, weeks to do anyway. So we then made a very quick decision. We have to get on somewhere else and tell our story. And I think I made the decision, maybe with some advice, but I said we have to do it once, and we do it live. And we went on Nightline. I don't know if you remember Ted Koppel's show. I don't think Ted Koppel was on that night. But we said we would only do one interview. It would be live, and it would be Nightline. And that allowed the governor to tell what we were doing, where we were at the state of the investigation, and how we're just getting started. And it deflected a great deal of that. So I learned, try to do it live and try to do a very short taping or however long it's going to be, and not a sentence more, because you don't know sometimes under the most innocent circumstances something can happen. I don't blame the reporter. I blame the producers. Because when he turns this in, that he doesn't even know they're going to splice his own copy. That was the CBS experience, and the reporters identified in the book. I won't do it now, but those are the things I learned. So have your press guy in the room. Some of you might be senators someday. He's going to have to represent you when you're not there. He knows your rhythms. Try not to do a long show unless you can control, I don't mean content, I mean the circumstance under which it will appear. And respond very quickly. Don't just disappear. We had an issue, we had to deal with it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Felzenberg. Throughout the process, as you both mentioned, it was kind of hard to get government documents at times to really uncover what was the intelligence that the administration had or they didn't have. One of the big names that testified before the commission was Condoleezza Rice. So, Governor Kean, could you please elaborate? What were your thoughts of Condoleezza Rice coming to the commission, testifying, and the importance of it?
Well, first of all, it was extraordinary because nobody in the national security area who wasn't a cabinet member had ever testified before Congress on any subject because they didn't have to. They were the president's personal appointees. So this was the first time that somebody with this kind of a title had ever appeared in public at a hearing. Secondly, some of the families were very suspicious. Some of them were traumatized, of course, by if you lose your son or your brother or whatever, you could be traumatized by it. But some of them were very suspicious, and they felt that President Bush and Condi Rice, and maybe a few others, had what's called presidential daily briefings, which is intelligence briefing that the president gets every single morning for intelligence agencies. And one of those briefings, at least maybe more, had said there may be a plot in there to fly planes into buildings. And so the families felt that she had information that affected the fact what happened to their sons and daughters and so on. And so there's a lot of tension about her hearing. And she was, again, a very visible figure in the Bush administration. One of the highest appointed African Americans in the nation's history, very intelligent woman, all that. So when she appeared, they suspended everything else on television. I don't know what time we had the hearing at 9 o'clock in the morning or something, but they preempted the Today Show, preempted all those shows, and there we were. So it was a big deal. And Condoleezza Rice, I think, did very well. She had some very tough questions, but she really handled herself well. And of course, she leave for a while until I saw the presidential daily briefings. The family still suspected there was something out there that they weren't being told, but she handled herself well, I thought.
Thank you, Governor. So eventually the 9/11 Commission findings, or most of it, went through the legislative process through Congress and became law in 2004. Question that I have is, one of the major transitions after 9/11 was reform in the intelligence field and the creation of the Director of National Intelligence. Governor Kean, how do you think interagency cooperation would function without the DNI? And do you think the intelligence community still needs reform?
Yeah, we had a big problem with the intelligence community. The more we studied what had happened in 9/11, the more we were made aware of real intelligence failures, how the system, even under the best people, failed us and failed more than once. And one of the big problems we found was that the intelligence agencies didn't share information with one another. You know, if you're intelligence, you're brought up to keep things secret. I mean, that's what you do. You keep things secret. Well, they kept everything secret to themselves and their own agencies. So for an example, a very quick example, when there were people who had been involved in the Cole bombing, who were tracked by the CIA to Kuala Lumpur for a meeting of terrorists, and they left Kuala Lumpur, where these two terrorists went was the United States. They ended up in San Francisco and San Diego. Now, the CIA knew who they were. They knew they were involved in terrorism. They knew all those things. The FBI had never heard the names. They didn't know anything about them. So they registered under their own names, got driver's licenses, got credit cards, got all the kind of things that you would need to have if you're going to exist in this country. And because there'd been no communication from the CIA, I had one simple phone call saying, we've been tracking these terrorists. We think they're coming into the United States. Very possibly would have prevented 9/11. And so, and I could give you a number of other examples, but we felt that the intelligence, at least in this atmosphere, was not working and was not working for the American people. And therefore, it had to be reformed. That was a big issue for us. And once we had gotten the partisan stuff behind us, so we trusted each other, there was real disagreement. I mean, I did not know a lot about intelligence when I became chairman of the commission. I know what you know and what American people know is about it. There were people who spent their life studying intelligence. And we had John Lehman, the Secretary of the Navy, who was an expert on intelligence. We had a number of other, we had a former Attorney General. We had a bunch of people who had studied intelligence. And they had really strong ideas. Lee Hamilton had very strong ideas of what he thought should happen to intelligence. And they didn't always agree. So once we got past all the partisan stuff, these were genuine disagreements. So trying to put together an agreement on what should be the structure of the United States intelligence and how we were going to make one of the largest reforms in the history of the United States government and try to get it through Congress, that was a big deal. And we did it. It was not easy. But the nice thing about it was the final discussions and the arguments were not partisan at all. Just people who strongly believe this or that ought to be done to keep the American people safer.
Thank you, Governor. One question I have for both of you, we're almost out of time, is as people who both lived and breathed the causes and effects of 9/11, what do you think is the most important for those of us who were born after 9/11 to take away from those attacks?
Well, that's a good question, but a difficult one. One thing is to never really let your guard down. I mean, we've now left Afghanistan. 9/11 happened because we allowed Osama bin Laden 2 or 3 years of uninterrupted peace to plan and pull off the attack. Now, that can't be allowed to happen again. We say in the report, never again can a group of terrorists planning to attack the United States be given a safe space somewhere for that long to plan. So that requires an intelligence community that can find out what's happening. We knew bin Laden was there, by the way. We didn't do anything about it, but anything serious about it. But we can't ever allow that to happen again. And then, our 41 recommendations. And by the way, every single one of them was adopted in whole or in part, except for one. But that's what to never, to always be aware. This country, democracy is very vulnerable. I mean, we have, if you've in China now, you've got all sorts of cameras following you around, everything else. All modern technology simply wants to keep the individual in place. We don't have that in this country. So it's a much harder country to defend from things like terrorism for that reason. So I think it's simply that, we can never take anything for granted. We can never let our guard down, and we've got to continue to operate on the reforms which we passed and the Congress ratified.
Dr. Felzenberg?
Yeah, a couple of things. I would say study history. There are a number of events that happened in your lifetime, in my lifetime, and you see a couple of patterns right away. Governor mentioned the Kennedy assassination. I'm not talking conspiracy theories. I'm talking about things that went on that day that you go back and look at that we thought we had fixed. And then 20 years ago, President Reagan was shot. And again, some of the same problems occurred. We're not talking conspiracy theories. Be aware of your surroundings. If you see something, say something. If you see something suspicious, I'm not saying you go to the cops every time you see a person who doesn't dress like you or think like you or look like you. But if he's in a place he doesn't normally belong, if he's looks like he's casing the joint out, if he's carrying something with him, don't depend on technology. these iPhones came in and we all got rid of our address books. And we all sort of put all of our numbers in one place. And of course, we have an emergency. Guess what won't work? Your phone. Pencils and papers worked. Flashlights worked. If you have any medications you need, if you have any emergency phone numbers or doctor's numbers or other things, I would get out the old address book. I would get out the old index cards. I'd know where they were. I would use your cell phone when you need to, but numbers you actually have to have and people you have to have in emergencies to have. Read as much as you can and take a great interest in government. I don't mean running for government if you don't want to. I wish more of your generation did, but even as an informed citizen, find out whether the person you're listening to who wants a position of responsibility is giving you spin or giving you truth. The governor would say I used to have him come to my classes all the time when we could get the schedules together. And he always, at the end, would look at the students and would say, remember, if you don't take an interest in government, you don't take an interest about how these decisions are made, you'll always be governed by your inferiors. What he meant was people who are going into it for the wrong reasons. They see a chance to make some deals or some money. They see a chance to help their friends or themselves in a financial deal using access to the Congress and to this and that. No, if you don't do it, they will do it. There's never a shortage of people running for office. Isn't that interesting? No matter how we run down the system and how we get cynical, there's always candidates. You should be in that mix. If not the candidate, then some of the people who pick the candidate and care about the country. A lot of valor happened on 9/11. It was a terrible day, tremendous tragedies, but there was great nobility that we saw in the police and the EMTs. And this wonderful group the governor just saw, Mary Fetchett and her husband have this, they're parents of a son who died that day. They've set together an enormous organization that provides support for other people and focuses on resilience. Resilience came out of 9/11. They're heroes behind every door in some ways. So that's what I would say to you.
Thank you, Dr. Felzenberg. Another question I have is, recently President Biden released documentation relating to Saudi Arabia's alleged ties to plotting 9/11. Do both of you think we will ever get a definitive account regarding this issue?
I've seen the documents that are being released. There's nothing definitive there. The families are involved in a lawsuit, or some of the families, and they are going where the money is. They would like compensation for the terrible losses. Saudis have the money, and so they're suing the Saudis. And a lot of these hijackers had Saudi passports. Well, the reason they had Saudi passports is that Saudis were a friend. We treated people immigrating from Saudi Arabia differently than we treat if they're coming from Yemen. So, I don't think they're going to find anything from what I've seen of definitive. There is more evidence in my mind of the documents I've read of some involvement by Syria, not Syria, or Iran, than there is of Iran. We did document. We know that Iran let some of the terrorists go through their territory so they could train with bin Laden in Afghanistan. So I think to me, I saw whether the secret documents I read, there's more evidence of that kind of involvement than there was. Now you can't say never ending that something could come forward I haven't seen. We always said that something new may come forward, but the documents that I know they're now looking at, I don't think there's anything there.
Dr. Felsenberg?
One thing, not about the documents, but I was a little disappointed in the way the president handled the Khashoggi matter. I mean, here is a man who was a permanent resident of the United States, a journalist working for the Washington Post, and he is basically murdered in an embassy asking for a visa so he could get married or whatever the reason was. And these Saudi people came, the rest of the story. And he also, as a candidate, criticized the last administration for not coming clean. And there are all these stories in the press about he's not coming clean because the Trump family has all these hotels going up in Riyadh. And all right, well, okay, fine. Election's over. And he was asked more about this report. And he basically said national security. That's all fine. And I'm not saying the report should be open, but people in our care who travel, and that could be any of us, on foreign soil, I think deserve a better answer than that. And I know the press is trying to push this. And even if we don't know what the report says and which princes were involved or which agents were involved, we certainly have a right to be assured that the Secretary of State brings this up every time he meets with that government. And the president himself brings it up every time he meets in private with the king or with the prince, whoever he's meeting with. That's all I'll say about that. I haven't seen the documents. I don't know more about this case.
There's one more thing I would say, and that is that, like, I was one of 4 commissioners who saw the presidential daily briefings, which is the holy of secrets. No congressional committee has ever seen one of them. I mean, nobody's ever allowed to see them. We were allowed to go in and look at them. I'll say one of the open scandals, I think, in this democracy is that we overclassify. There were documents that I saw that were deeply classified that the American people have every right to. There was nothing in those documents that would compromise the United States security or sources or anything else. Somebody just put the classified stamp on them. I'd say of all the documents I saw in the 2 years or whatever of our work, it's at the minimum 60% of them should have been public. So that's just a topic you didn't ask me about, and it's not there. But I was left with a deep impression that the United States government, under every administration, puts a classified stamp on too much, and does not allow the American people to see what the American people should be entitled to see.
Thank you. One final question I had before we adjourn, due to earlier. What is one piece of advice you both can share to the aspiring leaders of tomorrow?
Read as much as you can. Ask, we used to tell our students there's nothing as a dumb question. Ask what you don't know, ask where you can get more information. And always get more than one source. Don't take anything as definitive. I wrote a book on how can a voter predict what would make a good president. I'm not talking about whether he agrees with you, but whether he has the stamina, the emotional capacity, capabilities, and all that. I would say look for varied life experience. Look for intellectual curiosity. Look for people who have a capacity not to take themselves too seriously, to take their job very seriously, but not themselves too seriously. It's not about you. And a spontaneous sense of humor does help. And I mean, reading jokes that someone else writes for you. I mean, spontaneous sense of wit and detachment. I think that's the best preparation, other than study history.
Yeah. You know, that I'd echo what Al just said. I had a good friend who was a young student at Harrow when Winston Churchill was still alive. And that was Churchill's school. Every year he came by the school. And he poked his head in my friend's classroom's door and said, "Any of you men have any questions?" My friend stuck out his hand and said, "I'm a young American, and I think I want to go into politics. What should I do?" His answer was Al's last 3 words: study history, study history, study history. Then he walked out. So that is, to me, all our great presidents in my mind have been either professional or amateur historians. They've all had a sense of our history. Secondly, know yourself and be true to yourself. There are temptations. If you want to go into public life, there are going to be people offering you everything. You're going to get elected if you take this position, or you can't take that position, or this is important for your party or your. The people I know who go that route and do what they have to do in order to get themselves into office, make lousy public officials, one, and secondly, I don't think they're very happy because they're not happy with themselves. Being true to yourself and what you believe. You can make nothing wrong with compromises. Compromise along the way, but in the compromise, say what you believe and stick to it. You'll get confronted again and again in public life. And the third thing is have respect for other people and respect for other people's views. In the country today, congressmen don't talk to each other if they're in different parties. People who are moderates, the Republican or Democratic parties, aren't very welcome very often in party meetings. It's crazy. Talk to each other, share ideas, respect people. People who go into politics, in my experience, usually go in for the right reasons. And even if you don't agree with them, that opinion deserves respect. And if you don't give them the respect on that opinion, you're not going to be able to work with them in the future on something else. So I just remember that this country, as you remember, was founded on a compromise. Funnily enough, it's called the New Jersey Plan, but between the big states and the small states. And people felt very strongly, had that compromise not been done, we wouldn't have a country. We wouldn't have been able to get that Constitutional Convention, wouldn't have worked. So that's the final thing, is listen to other people, be willing to take your own views and with your own beliefs, and recognize you can compromise with somebody who has equally strong beliefs across the aisle. Otherwise, you get nothing done. Every important policy I know in this country that's been successful was done through a compromise. And that goes back 60 years.
Thank you very much, Governor Kean, and thank you both for your service to this country and helping make our country a little bit more safer. Now we're out for time, sadly. I wish we could have more, but I'd like to thank you lastly once more, Governor Kean, Dr. Felzenberg. Have a great evening. This video will be posted on our social media accounts for future reference, and we'll make sure both of you get a copy of this video. And have a phenomenal evening, everyone. Take care. God bless.
You too. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, thank you very much.